Today from the global lane, Israel in crisis. Americans, including evangelical Christians, turn their backs on the Jewish state.
It's happened because the church has bought into something called replacement theology.
Day of the Christian Martyr. 10 years later, remembering the ISIS siege against Iraqi Christians.
Tens of thousands fled, but there were those that stayed and paid with their lives.
An American immigrant warns about the knock at the door and illegal migrants.
Americans are worried about all these issues. They're worried about the crime and the drugs that are coming to their streets. For us to believe that the same people that got us into this mess are going to get us out is ridiculous.
Beaten and bloodied, punched and pepper sprayed. Anti-Semitic violence in L.A. And it's all right here on the global lane. A moment of existential crisis. That's how our next guest describes the threat to Israel, the United States, and the world at this pivotal time in history. Robert Stearns is overseeing Bishop of the Tabernacle Church of Buffalo. He heads Eagle's Wings. That's a ministry that builds bridges between Christians and Jews. And he's author of the new book, Rise and Rebuild, a guide to overcoming adversity. Bishop Stearns, it's good to have you here in Virginia Beach with us. What don't Christians, even Christians, people in the church, what don't they understand about Israel?
What we don't understand about Israel is that there are twin forces, two forces that pose an existential threat to our way of life, the Judeo-Christian worldview, the basic liberties and freedoms that the West cherishes. And those twin threats are radicalized Islam and far-left militant secularism. And bizarrely, these two forces, militant secularism and radical Islam, are now colluding together against the Jewish state of Israel and against the Jewish people worldwide. Every time we look at history, we see that what starts with the Jews does not end with the Jews. They call Israel the little Satan. They call America and the West the big Satan.
It's not just Iran that says that.
Absolutely not. Iran sends its message of hate and vitriol and jihad and genocide all throughout the world. And we see alliances with Qatar, we see Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, all of this evil encroaching upon this tiny Jewish state.
And we've seen this rising anti-Semitism on our college campuses, and even the White House is lukewarm in the relationship with Israel. Maybe at times even hostile. So what's happening? How has that happened?
Well, it's happened because the church has bought into something called replacement theology that essentially says that God's covenant with Israel is over, God's done with the Jews, and the church is the new Israel, the church is the new Jews. Well, that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible tells us clearly in the book of Romans that Christians have been grafted into God's covenant with the Jewish people, and that God's covenant with Abraham endures. God says, as long as the sun and moon are in place, this is how strong my covenant is. Last time I checked, the sun and the moon are still lighting up our world. And so when we begin to assault the character of God, which is what replacement theology is. Replacement theology is an assault on the character of God. It's saying, God, you don't keep your promises. You don't keep your covenants. When you do that, you chip away at the foundation of our faith. And the foundation of America and the West is our Judeo-Christian worldview.
So it's really a spiritual battle right now that we're in.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Without question.
And Eagle's Wings, you just returned from a trip to Israel where you had 32 pastors join you.
That's right.
What did they learn? What did they come to understand that they didn't know before they went there?
Well, Eagle's Wings has made it our mission to identify young, emerging pastors and bring them to Israel. Because for so many pastors, the trip to Israel is a bucket list item that they want to do sometime in their life, and they end up doing it in their late 60s, their early 70s, and you've lost 40 years of their ministerial career, 40 years of sermons and of influence over that congregation. So we scholarship young pastors, we bring them to Israel, and what we have found overwhelmingly is that they come back and they say, this is nothing nothing at all like what the media portrays.
Oh, so it's all about moral clarity and making that connection of our faith. Right?
You know, in the late 30s, as Hitler rose to power in Germany, before Nazism took a hold, there was a courageous pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer went to the 18,000 churches in Germany. There were 18,000 churches as Hitler rose to power. And he appealed to those churches to stand against this rising tide of evil. Tragically, only 3,000 churches stood with Bonhoeffer. 15,000 churches, some of them actually sided with Hitler, but the majority of them, 12,000 churches, said, we can't get involved politically. This is outside our realm of spiritual discourse. And what happened was the tragedy of Nazi Germany, the tragedy of the Holocaust. How many lives were lost? How many human lives were lost?
Is it being repeated now?
I am sobered to say, I believe we're in a Bonhoeffer moment. And if the church does not wake up, I believe it will be too late.
And you've always said it's not just enough to pray. We can pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We need to get actively involved. How can we get involved?
We can get involved in several ways. Prayer is the beginning point, and I don't want to underestimate the power of prayer. It's powerful, it's crucial. But the second thing is you have to get educated. You have to understand what happened in 1948. What happened in 1967? What are all of these wars that Israel has faced? The reality is Israel's been at war since 48. I mean, there's a brief respite here and a brief, pause there, but attack after attack. Why? This isn't about the creation of a Palestinian state. Israel has offered a two-state solution over and over and over again.
I always tell people Gaza was a two-state. They had their own administration for 20 years.
I was with Prime Minister Sharon in his office about 6 weeks before he made that decision to withdraw from Gaza, and we were discussing that momentous decision. Gaza could have become, the Singapore of the Middle East. It could have become a beautiful, flourishing city. What happened?
Billions for tunnels.
Billions for tunnels.
And rockets.
Not to build schools, not to build up a society. And so what happens is we interpret that Middle East situation through a Western lens. And we say, well, surely all Hamas wants is peace. No, Hamas doesn't want peace. Hamas wants the genocide of the Jewish people, the obliteration of the state of Israel.
Okay, the book is Rise and Rebuild, A Guide to Overcoming Adversity. Bishop Robert Stearns, thank you for being with us.
It's great to be with you today. Thank you,
Appreciate you being here in Virginia Beach.
An honor.
Worldwide, 1 in 7 Christians, 365 million, face persecution for their faith in Christ. June 29th is Day of the Christian Martyr, a time of remembering those who died for following Jesus. This year, the Voice of the Martyrs is placing the focus on a particular group of persecuted Christians rather than one individual martyr. VOM radio host and Vice President Todd Nettleton is here to explain. Todd, who are the persecuted Christians featured this year and why?
Well, this year we're focusing on the Christians in the Nineveh Plains, especially the city of Mosul, because it was 10 years ago. In fact, it was 10 years ago this month that ISIS swept into that city. They gave the Christians a choice. Hey, you can become Muslims, you can run for your lives, or you can be killed. And thousands, tens of thousands fled, but there were those that stayed and paid with their lives.
Todd, I remember it well. I was there in El Kosh as Christians from Karakosh fled ISIS, seeking refuge in that small northern Iraqi city, and they sought safety there, shelter, because it's a Christian village, but many came without possessions. They told of Christians being killed, kidnapped, their homes and churches being looted and destroyed. They needed food, diapers, mattresses, pillows, everything imaginable. CBN provided those. I know VOM did the same, but Todd, I remember the Bishop of Mosul telling me that ISIS did not only kill humans, but Christian history and dignity. So this had a lasting impact, did it not?
It absolutely has had a lasting impact, and churches were destroyed. Churches were conscripted as ISIS property. I remember seeing one that had become like the ISIS courthouse. They turned a church into where ISIS meted out its form of justice to the citizens there. But as you say, that history for these Christian communities, which literally go back hundreds and even thousands of years, having that history wiped out was such a great loss to them. And I'll never forget being with a pastor in the city of Erbil as the refugees were fleeing into that city. One of his prayer requests at the end of our conversation, I said, "Hey, I'm going back to talk to American Christians. How can they pray for you?" The very first thing he said, "Pray that God will call Christians to stay here, because there are so many reasons to flee. It makes perfect sense why you would want to go someplace safer, someplace where your children had an opportunity." But he said, "We still need to have a Christian presence in this country, in this region. Pray that God will call Christians to stay here." You know, we're 10 years down the road. I think that's still a good prayer request, because again, there are still so many natural reasons to leave, but certainly God wants to have lighthouses in that part of the world.
Yeah, they need to be salt and light. And I mean, it's gone from what, about 1.5 million in Iraq down to maybe 250,000, 500,000 at the most. The ISIS caliphate is long gone now, Todd. So what should Christians here in America do? What should they do now?
Well, one of the things we're doing specifically on this day of the Christian Martyr is remembering those who gave their lives. And, you know, I think it's important to say this is not a kind of a hero worship thing. Wow, they were super Christians and I'm just an average Christian. I could never be like them. That's not really what we're going for. We're going for a sense of inspiration. These are brothers and sisters who were given the chance to live if they would only deny Christ. And they said, "No, I will not deny Christ. Even if you kill me, I will not deny. I am a Christian. I am a follower of Jesus Christ." I think the challenge for us is to interpret that into our context, because most of us aren't facing that choice. Nobody's going to put a gun to our head. In fact, you know, if I go and talk to my neighbors about Jesus, the chances of them shooting me or even beating me up or even slapping me are almost zero. What I'm risking is really an awkward conversation. You know, it could get a little awkward. They might say, "Yeah, I don't care about that. Yeah, I don't want to hear about your Jesus." Maybe it would be an awkward conversation, but am I willing to take that risk? When brothers and sisters are laying down their lives to advance the gospel, I hope that we are inspired to say, "Hey, the risk of an awkward conversation, yeah, that's actually a pretty small risk. I'm willing to take that risk to see Christ's kingdom advanced on my street, in my neighborhood, in my city." That's really what we want to take out of this day of the Christian Martyr, is that sense of inspiration of, hey, what would I sacrifice to see the gospel advance where I am?
And through all this, there is a positive, or many positives, despite the suffering and persecution, right? What are the positives?
Well, the kingdom of God is advancing. There are still Christians in northern Iraq. In fact, I just heard a story this week of a couple that was called to go and pastor a church in the city of Mosul. And they wrestled with it because, you know, there's a lot of Mosul that's not there anymore. It is not a good situation. The infrastructure has been destroyed. It is, you know, it's a very difficult place to live, regardless of what religion you are. And then to say, I'm going to go as a Christian and as a pastor, and I'm going to lead a church there. They really wrestled with that. But at the end of the day, they said, God is calling us to go. We are going to follow God's call. That is the bright side of this story. God is still calling people, and people are still willing to go and to make that sacrifice to advance the gospel.
Okay, June 29th is the day of the Christian Martyr, acknowledged in many churches as the day the Apostle Paul was martyred, but also a time to remember other Christians who have died for their faith in Christ. Todd Nettleton, Voice of the Martyrs, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
A new poll of U.S. Latino voters finds 41% trust Donald Trump on immigration, compared to 38% for President Biden. The poll was released last week by the Equus Company and was taken before the president announced his latest immigration initiatives. Our next guest knows a lot about immigration. He is an American immigrant. His family escaped communism in Vietnam after the war there. He's now the vice president of Expeditors, a Fortune 500 company. Hung Kao is a U.S. Navy combat veteran, a U.S. Senate candidate for Virginia, and the author of the book, Call me an American. Hung, it's a pleasure. I'm sure a lot of Virginians would like to call you Senator Cow. So after the economy, immigration is shaping up to be a top issue on the minds of voters. You're from an immigrant family, so what needs to be done?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much for having me on. I came here as a refugee, and this country gave me everything. I mean, I grabbed onto the American dream. I went to the top high school in the country, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. I went to the United States Naval Academy, where I earned a bachelor's in engineering, and I went to Naval Postgraduate School with a master's in physics, and then I had fellowships at Harvard and MIT. But you know what? I paid back every single dime of that American dream with 25 years of service in Navy Special Operations. I was a Navy deep sea diver who recovered John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife and his sister-in-law, and I also defused bombs for our SEAL teams and Special Forces teams in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. So my thing to illegal immigrants is this: don't come to America and ask for the American dream if you're not willing to obey the American laws and embrace the American culture, because I did. I paid back every single dime, and I wrote a blank check to this nation up to and including my life because I love it so much. And that's what it means to be an American to me.
Well, President Biden has issued an executive order protecting spouses of illegal immigrants from deportation. What do you think of that?
There's a legal term, and it doesn't fit here, but I think it's kind of good. It's called fruit of a poison tree. Basically it's when police officers get evidence from sources that are not legal, and so everything from that is illegal. Well, I think that term kind of fits in this situation too. You can't get something legal out of an illegal act. So fruit of a poison tree, I think, would kind of work in this situation where, if you came here illegally and then you do something legal, everything after you did that was illegal should be deemed illegal.
Well, let's move on the issue of protecting the vote. There are allegations of election fraud right here in Virginia, in Lynchburg, ballot mishandling, an unlocked drop box. And then in Louisiana, they recently passed a law that requires proof of citizenship when registering to vote. What do you think of those developments and the requirements to show an ID before voting?
Well, in Afghanistan and Iraq, you know how we secured the vote? You have this finger that you dip into this paint and it lasts over a week. And that's how we secured a vote in those countries. And so that's a third world country, and we're able to do that. And people staying in line for hours, even believing that they might get killed, by an IED or something like that, because they believe so much in our rights to vote. And over here, less than half the American populace are willing to vote, which is a tragedy. I mean, Arlington National Cemetery is lined up full of brave men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for us to vote. And so I encourage everybody to go out and vote. And of course, there's always going to be some abnormalities here and there. And the issue is that Virginia has, I think, one of the most secure things, because you actually have to fill out a hand ballot first, then it gets scanned in. Now, the way I believe we should do it is, for me to fly on a plane right now, we need Clear ID. And Virginia driver's licenses are all going to Clear ID. And that's a federally, funded issue, funded program. If I can overlay that with E-Verify, now we can see if a person's a citizen or not. And on my driver's license, it says veteran. So I don't see why we can't put a mark on there that says not U.S. citizen, so that it can be clearly seen by the registrars that this person cannot vote.
And late last week, your opponent in the Virginia race, Senator Tim Kaine, reintroduced Medicare ex-choice legislation, which would expand Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. So what do you think of universal health care? It's one of those issues where it's a very tough subject in the United States, but Medicare for all is Medicare for none, right? I mean, there's a lot of senior citizens that paid into this, Medicare and everything else, and it's basically going to be defunct in a few years. And if we give it to everyone, including illegal immigrants, which is what they're doing right now, you're basically going to say that no one's going to get it. And so we need to work through this situation, but doing a blanket, hey, let's give this to everybody, is not going to work for anybody. And tell me about your latest campaign ad. It features the knock at the door, and there are many Americans who get what you're talking about. Some escape communist oppression. Others worry about it happening more frequently right here in the USA. So why did you focus on that when many Virginians are just getting by, living paycheck to paycheck?
Well, again, you're right. We're paying $1 billion a day for illegal immigrants. And are we saying that we're running out of people to help in America, that we can just give our money away to illegal immigrants? I mean, that's just ludicrous. We need to take care of Americans first. And Americans are worried about the border and everything that's happening here, where people can just knock on your door and take you away. I mean, look what's happening to President Trump, right? I mean, they're throwing all sorts of indictments to him, and including from Jack Smith, who, remember, this is the guy that was responsible for Governor McDonnell getting indicted, and then the Supreme Court of the United States overturned it unanimously. So it shows you what a charlatan Jack Smith is. But again, Americans are worried about all these issues. They're worried about the crime and the drugs that are coming to their streets from the illegal immigrants. They're worried about the economy. Honestly, are you saying that everything's okay? I mean, for us to believe that the same people that got us into this mess are going to get us out is ridiculous.
Okay, we'll see what happens here. Hung Kao, U.S. combat veteran, candidate for the U.S. Senate from Virginia, author of the book Call Me an American. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Take a look at this anti-Semitic violence. People beaten and bloodied, punched and pepper sprayed. No, this isn't Tehran, but right here in America, in the Jewish Pico-Robertson neighborhood of Los Angeles, where pro-Hamas protesters prevented worshipers from entering the Adass Torah synagogue. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman tweeted, "Just imagine the political reaction if this were a different minority, being blocked from church by the KKK." President Biden responded the next day, tweeting that he was appalled by the violence, which was dangerous, unconscionable, anti-Semitic, and un-American. Bravo, Mr. President. You must be watching the polls instead of listening to anti-Semitic leftists in your party. I'm sure the primary election defeat this week of squad member New York Congressman Jamal Bowman got your attention. Folks, Jewish Americans stood alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, marching in the streets for civil rights in the 1960s. Today, they're just as deserving as any Americans to be protected, safe and secure in their homes and places of worship. Without that assurance, there will be many more Jamal Bowman sent packing this November. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. And until next time, be blessed.